Presbytery, we had a very negative experience about, gee, now it's getting to be about 30-ish years ago, with a church plant. There was a growing suburb just north of Los Angeles, and we had one established Presbyterian church up there, but they were sort of stuck in a bit of a rut. We felt like there needed to be a new one. And so what we did was, we also found that the Methodists were doing really well up there. So we thought to ourselves, surely we would too. It's such a great place to be. How could anybody fail? Well, we found a way, and it was a very expensive way, as it turns out. We ended up, over a period of about 5 years, spending today what would be about $800,000 US on a project that just did not work. People did not work together well. The one remaining aspect of that for us has been bitterness and recrimination. And it just was very unfortunate. We realized we didn't know what we didn't know, and that we were in a situation where we were trying to bring the old model of the 20th century into our almost 21st century context, and it simply didn't work. So we also understood, however, that our polity was focused on the 20th century and the way we did things, the people we looked to involve, the expectations we had of those people. Al Roxburgh has a whole rubric he does on that, and how the 20th century influenced the expectations of church participants and church leaders. We realized that we were structured to be a regulatory body. In our Book of Order, it stated that the Presbytery will control the locations of new churches. Church leaders would be expected to serve in committee structures, and churches would have a session and committees, and all that had worked very well in a different era. But we had a feeling it might not be so in the century to come. And we essentially knew that we couldn't change that structure so much. And basically what we decided to do was just ignore it if we could, and address it when we had to. So we began kind of, if you will, doing an inventory of what the Presbytery had to offer. And we actually had a lot. And the best resource I think we had was that we had unselfish leaders from our churches. I don't know how they would have reacted in their own congregations, but as participants in the life of our Presbytery, they were willing to try new ideas. They were willing to experiment. They were willing to spend money if they had a sense that there were people they could trust who were attempting to do something new that might be productive. So I thought that was a great step forward based upon the significant disappointment we'd had before. One thing also that was a real resource for us is that I'd been around for a while at that point. I began with this Presbytery in 1987. So people knew me, and they seemed to trust me, and they knew, I believe, that I wasn't trying to force an agenda on them, was trying to help them seek seek whatever was God's agenda for us. So that was a great help. And the people of our presbytery knew that something had to change. Most of them didn't know what or how, but they knew that we were in a downward track, and that I don't know what it was like north of the border, but here in the States, a lot of church bodies peaked in their membership and participation in 1965. That was the case for us. And so by this time, we had had a 30-year downtrend, and people knew that for all the good ideas and sincere attempts that they had made, hadn't changed that downtrend. So they didn't know what to do, they didn't know how to do it, but they were willing to support people who would try something. And that was, to me, a huge asset. I was just very grateful for that quality of leadership we had in the Presbytery. Another thing we had was we had money in the bank, and we have been the beneficiaries of a very high value real estate market. So when we needed to sell some properties over the years, we were able to gain very good prices for them. And we had a group of trustees, mostly at that time businessmen, who were good stewards of that money. They managed it well, but one of the things I really appreciated about them was that they wanted to see it used for ministry. They weren't gatekeepers. They weren't people who were telling others no. They were looking for reasons to say yes to ministry. Too often there weren't the ones that might have helped, but that was going to change. As what we found out, I talked to a consultant one time, a well-known fellow, and asked what denominations were making real progress in terms of innovative leadership, new churches. And he said, there really are none. All the denominations are dead in the water. So at the next meeting of our committee, which supervised these sorts of ministries, I reported that, and one of our committee members, an elder, a retired school teacher, said, I think he's wrong. I think there is a denomination that is making great progress. It's the Evangelical Covenant Church. I knew hardly anything about the ECC. Did some research about them. I found out that they have churches in Canada, they have churches in the States, but I didn't know anybody, so I just called up their main number on the West Coast and said, who can I talk to? Who could tell me about your efforts at starting new congregations? And they put me in touch with their Western area church planting director, who very soon made it obvious that they had done an incredible amount of work, produced curriculum, produced all kinds of resources that they were more than happy to give to us, no cost at all. They invited us into their training curriculum and some of their training events, which to me were a real eye-opener. I did not know much about this area of innovative ministry and starting new congregations. Here's one place that opened my eyes. During one of those conferences put on by the Evangelical Covenants, the national director of training came up to our table and he said, Ken, "You know what's wrong with you Presbyterians?" And I said, "No, Dave, but I always love to hear what's wrong with us. Tell me." And he said, "You guys think like realtors." I couldn't figure out what that was about. He said, "With you, it's all about location, location, location." And what we've learned is that it's really all about leadership, leadership, leadership. If you get the right leadership, the location will take care of itself. And as he said that, I was almost knocked off my feet by realizing that our failure in the effort we had tried some years before in the city of Santa Clarita was doomed because we didn't have the right leader. We had a good person, but we had assumed, well, if you send a good person out to this place, naturally they will be effective and succeed, and there will be a new church and a thriving ministry. And it was not so. And by his statement, I realized what we had done wrong. But it was a great learning. And so we worked together, a number of us were working on this. We had a committee. At that time, we had my predecessor, who was the executive presbyter. And we had a young man that we had met along the way, a fellow by the name of Nick Warnes, who a number of you know, and I think actually Nick is on this call today. I was at a lunch with this regional planting director from the ECC, and he said, "Okay, we've taught you our whole approach, our whole system. All you got to do now is find somebody who wants to start a church." And I said, "Wayne, as a Presbyterian, I've never met anybody who wants to start a church. I don't know where to turn." And he said, "Well, let's just pray about it for a minute, and then we have to go our separate ways." So we did that, and we went off to various places. I went back to the church building. And that prayer was answered faster than just about any I can remember. Within an hour, Nick was sitting in my office. It was actually an intern at the church where I was on the staff at that time, but I barely knew him. And yet his office was across the hall. There were lots of interns in and out. And as he told me about his vision for starting a new church and what he could imagine God was calling him toward, it was exactly what I think we needed to do. So a number of us got together, the committee, the evangelism committee, my predecessor, Nick. I was working on that also, and we worked together some ideas. We did training together on our own and with the Covenant Church, and we realized, one, we had just an incredibly talented, committed leader in Nick as far as a potential church planter. Then we needed to go to our presbytery and to interpret for them what needed to happen. I was looking back last night at the presentation I made. I think it was in 2007 or 2008. It was a PowerPoint at one of our stated meetings, one of our 5 times a year meetings, and held up for people where our presbytery stood in terms of members from when we had from a few years previous to where we were headed at a time in the future if we didn't do anything different. Told them the story through this PowerPoint presentation of the people we met who wanted to help us and what they had taught us. And we Uh, we worked through that and then got the green light, if you will, to pursue this strategy of planting a new church under a new model with a new leader. Nick turned out to be a wonderful leader and interpreter of that effort. I don't know about the meetings that you have in your presbyteries, but in ours, there was not a lot of, if you will, story time. There wasn't much opportunity in the agenda to interpret a new ministry and um, uh, to show slides and to review anecdotes of what had happened. But what really made a difference, I think, is that Nick was at every Presbytery meeting, and he was meeting people, he was talking with them, listening to their hopes, telling them his vision. And even though it wasn't on the docket of the meeting, those were hugely important interactions. And particularly as the years went by, we learned it was so important not just to have a engaging and charismatic leader, but also somebody who had done the kind of work that needed to be done. There were some other folks too that I should mention and include in this. We had what the folks I think of as the undercover Canadians. We had two women who were leaders in the Presbytery. One was a former United Church pastor from Toronto, and she took one of our churches in the northern part of our county. I'm sure you're aware that in every district, in every school district, in every sales territory, in every municipal area, in every denominational territory, there's always at least one place that doesn't fit with the rest of the area. And that place for our presbytery has been the northern part of Los Angeles County, which is the western end of the Mojave Desert. There's a mountain range in between LA and that desert area, which is not just a physical barrier, but it's an emotional one. Those of us in the city, in the immediate suburbs, are kind of, if you will, the LA people. And those who live up in the desert very clearly identify themselves as the "we're not LA" people. So our pastor up there, who we got from the United Church, was very enthusiastic about the possibilities for new ministry, about innovation. She was constantly speaking positively about their partnership with the rest of us and our partnership with them. That was huge. It helped beginning to bridge a gap, and we put some staff time into that too. But her role was really important, I think, in having support and encouragement from folks who often felt alienated from the rest of us, frankly. Now, also the first moderator that I worked with is still a Canadian woman by birth. She's a snowbird. She lives during the summers in Ottawa and the winters down here in LA. She's a retired psychologist, the former director of the Los Angeles County Mental Health Department, which is a big operation because we got a lot of people around here who need help in that area. And she was I think, from an established church, older person's perspective, she was our greatest cheerleader. She was always speaking positively about the efforts we were undertaking, telling people about Nick and the people he knew and he was connecting to our presbytery. And she was a master of the parking lot meeting. I often tell people the real meeting takes place in the parking lot after the official meeting has been adjourned. You know that phenomenon? Well, Arita would always be out there after the meeting with people who had left and who were standing around and maybe making some comments to the effect of, I'm not really sure about this new group of younger leaders. They seem like nice people, but do they know what they're doing? And she was always there to help folks calm their fears about that, about these new initiatives and these new directions. And so she was just a tremendous source of support and encouragement. As I say, much of the interpretation that we did through our presbytery, we had various things. We had articles and newsletters, and we got on the agenda of our regular stated meetings whenever we could, but our format didn't lend itself to that too well. So Nick's involvement in the life of the presbytery was really crucial. I think finally, after we'd been at it for 7 or 8 years, we did something I called an appreciation dinner, where we just set aside our agenda for one night of our stated meeting, and we just told the stories of the 3 of the innovative areas of ministry that we had been involved in, and actually many people did not know that much about, of our new church ministries through cyclical, our leadership training and evangelism training ministries through another program, and our work with our established churches. And we put on a nice dinner. We told people they didn't have to work. All they had to do was just visit with one another and hear the stories of the things that they'd made possible. And they went out of there feeling really great. And several people said, we have to do this every year. And I had to tell them, well, we just reviewed with you 30 years of ministry among the 3 programs. So that's hard to do every year, but we can do a better job of keeping you updated. One of the things that I try to do always was to be a permission giver. If anybody had an idea that was creative in any way, that we would give them a chance. We did have a program that did assessments for prospective church leaders, and those were done. We worked with our denomination. First one we did was just on our own, but found out it was a lot of work. Then we partnered with our denomination to begin doing those, and Nick was the primary leader on those. What I think they told us some things about who would do well and who might not. They didn't tell us everything, because we had our share of misfires. We had one young man who came over from India with just about a month's worth of living expenses in his pocket, and that was all. And he wanted to start, he and his wife wanted to start a church. They had a new baby. I visited with them in an apartment one night. They didn't have any food on the shelves. I said, let me get you some money. Go out and buy some groceries. And they became very committed to our presbytery and our work together. And we thought for sure that was going to succeed long term. It did not. But there were others. That one particular one, I I would have been surprised if it had ever got off the ground. It is a little congregation that moves around week to week. One week they meet in a pub in downtown Pasadena for dinner and discussion and communion. One week they go meet with a program that works with former gang members. Another week they go serve at a program for the homeless, and they do a spiritual retreat on the fourth week. I never thought that would get off the ground, but it did. And one thing that taught me was that the leader, who didn't seem to me to be that much of a natural leader, had an incredible gift of persistence, and he just didn't give up. And they've been going now for quite some years. So another thing we did, or we actually didn't do, was we just didn't require these leaders and starters of new ministries to be part of the Presbytery organization unless they wanted to be. I can remember going with a young man who was starting a church in another presbytery. It was one of our efforts, but he was in another presbytery. So I connected him with one of the leaders from that presbytery. And this gentleman, great guy, but he spent the whole lunch meeting saying, well, you need to go sit in on this committee, you need to observe that committee, you need to read these whole documents of our official rules and procedures, and then you need to talk to this committee chair and that stated clerk and this moderator. And when we walked out of the restaurant, he said, what would you think of that? And he said, if I had to do that, I'd give up now. There's no way I could pursue all that. So we just realized, okay, that's really not for everybody. But we've had some who have come in and have been gratefully appreciative of the opportunity to connect with the presbytery and to have colleagues and friends who they knew they could relate to. Just the last meeting of our presbytery, because I'm retired, I'm kind of staying away, but I know they welcome 2 new immigrant pastors. Very talented people who are very grateful for that opportunity. So what we did over the years, and when I say we, I've only played a small part of this, but we developed an identity as the innovation presbytery for our denomination. Because we were willing to try just about anything that someone sincerely wanted to attempt. We wanted to focus first on mission and keep that foremost. So as I told you, we started out as kind of a regulatory body, which would be traditional for our denomination. We ended up more as a mission agency, not people who were unaware of the regulations and the policies and procedures, but who put the priority instead on finding new ways to reach people for Christ in the communities of this area. And so that was the story of our effort, probably over about 30 years, starting with great disappointment, but really being blessed by the number of people who came to us, worked with us, even those who struggled in their effort, contributed something to our understanding, to our fellowship, to our sense of where God was leading us in our ministry for Jesus Christ. And I realize I have about 20 more seconds, so I'm going to stop there.